All right, so yeah, this one here, again, when I see a three-letter conjugated form, I'm hoping in the back of my head, hey, 3 letters, that's how many letters a root's supposed to have. Maybe this is my root. But there are only maybe 3 or 4 forms where the 3 letters you see are actually the 3 root letters. And so those forms are, first of all, the Cal Perfect 3MS form. So that with these root letters would be, that would be Shin, Kametz, Mem, Patach, Ayin. Oops. And then you could have the participle, Cal active participle, and it would be the masculine singular form. That would look like show, oops, probably shomea, shomea, something like that. Another one would be the, and we don't need to necessarily say Cal, but we've only learned Cal and PL so far. I guess Cal, we haven't even learned PL yet. So we'll say the Cal infinitive. The infinitive construct would be reduced in R1. So you've got the Shava here, then you've got the Mem, and usually you're going to have a holum, an O-class vowel for the infinitive, but the Ayin really likes the A-class vowel here, and so it's going to give you a furtive patak. So Shmoa, that would be the infinitive construct. Of course, the infinitive absolute is similar, but that's going to be a Kametz, Mem, and then either a holum Ayin or a holum Vav Ayin, something like that. That would be the infinitive absolute. And then the final one is going to be the imperative 2MS, and that form it's going to be very similar to the infinitive construct. In fact, it'll be identical to the infinitive construct in many forms, but in this particular form, for this particular word, because you've got a third guttural, and a third guttural Ayin likes that A-class vowel, you're going to have basically what we have here, Shema. Now, you were saying that you thought you were getting the imperative and infinitive confused, so let's look at what the infinitive would look like and how it would be different from this imperative. You can see from these forms, the form that we're looking at is not Cal Perfect 3MS, because that would have a Kametz Patak pattern, and this has a
What I thought it was. That's where I missed it.
Yeah, so this is pretty easy to gloss over. It's pretty easy to see the 3 letters in Shema and to see the Patak here, and just, I mean, you're so used to seeing the Cal Perfect 3MS form that this little difference, the Kametz to the Shava, that really, it goes under your radar until you have a lot of practice, but that essentially is the difference. These forms will look very similar. The only difference is going to be that first vowel. We know it's not the Cal active participle because that would have a holum sere pattern. This does not. Infinitive construct, that does have the Shava, so that's possible, but that holum here that the infinitove really likes to hang on to, that's missing. So we know that it's not an infinitive. That leaves us with the imperative 2MS. If we were to have something like an imperfect, let's just say an imperfect 2MS, because the imperative 2MS is built on the imperfect 2MS. The difference between those two would basically be the prefix. So in the imperfect, we call this sometimes the prefix conjugation. That's because all the forms of the imperfect are going to have a prefix. Third person masculine, you use a yod prefix. Second person, you use a tav prefix. So this is going to be a tav, and then a hirik, and then we've got our shin, and we use the shava here to kind of close this prefix syllable. This is now a closed syllable. And so the mem is going to begin a new syllable, and we're going, because we've got an ayin here, we're going to use a patach vowel, and then we put our ayin. So this is the 2MS form of the imperfect. The difference between that and the imperative is the prefix letter. That's the only difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and maybe I was confused. I thought in the imperative form, it had the prefix but not the suffix, or did I have that switched?
No, the imperative form, because there are certain imperfects that have both a prefix and a suffix. Every imperfect has a prefix. Some of the imperfects also have a suffix. When you go from imperfect to imperative, that suffix will remain if the imperative form had one. So, for example, the 2MP form would have a shurik suffix. It would be shemu. Actually, it would be shim. We would change it. It would actually look like this. Let me just write it out here. It would be because we're adding. There we go. Because we're adding this suffix here, we're kind of shifting the syllables, and so what would end up happening is it would actually look like we'd have to reduce this patak to a shava, then we add the shurik, but we can't have two shavas at the beginning of a word, so one of them is going to become a hirik. And so here, if you have the suffix. If you were to have I wish I could get rid of all these squigglies, but I have to click each one. So here in the imperfect 2MP form, we have the prefix and the suffix. But if we move that to the imperative, again, all we're going to do is take off this tav hiric prefix. That's going to leave us with shen shabah, mem shabah, ayin shurik. But again, you can't have two shabahs at the beginning of a word, and that's why it's going to go up to the hiric shabah. So shen hiric mem shabah. So in the imperative, you would keep any suffix that you see in the imperfect, but you would lose the prefix. So the way you were describing it, it is the reverse of that. It's not keep the prefix, lose the suffix. It's keep the suffix, lose the prefix.
I think that's where I got confused. I saw that 3-letter root and no, nothing too crazy. So in the imperative, if there's no suffix, is it always that shabah that's the first vowel?
Right here, you've got the 2ms imperfect gives you the tav hiric prefix with no suffix, but then the 2fs is different from the 2ms, and then it's got the tav hiric prefix and a hiric yod suffix. And then the 2mp has the tav hiric prefix and a shurik suffix. 2fp, tav hiric prefix, nun comma te suffix. So the only difference between these four forms in the imperfect is that fs has hiric yod suffix, mp has shurik suffix, fp has nun comma te suffix. So when you take the tav hiric off of each of these, this first one, nothing has to happen because you're not, well, how do I want to say this? I guess look at it this way would be easiest. If you look at the imperfect form, you only see one shavah in this form, and you only see one shavah, ignore this, you only see one shavah in this form. But in these two, you see two shavahs right next to each other, and you realize that if you take off the prefix letter, then this word's going to begin with two shavahs. And here, if you take off the prefix letter, then this word will begin with two shavahs. Down here, if you take off the prefix letter, it only begins with one shavah, even though there's another shavah later. So it's only these two forms where you have to kind of fix that double initial shavah situation. So it's only these middle two, the 2fs and the 2mp forms, that will have the hiric prefix in them versus the shavah prefix. And again, you're like, but it would be so much easier if it just began with that shavah, so I would know that it's an imperfect with the prefix removed. But again, it has to play by the rules. Hebrew cannot begin a word with two consecutive shavahs. And so this is a shavah, it's just because it's got a shavah right after it, it has to shift into a short vowel, and that's what happens. But down here, the 2fp and the 2ms, those forms do begin with the shavah in the imperative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful, thinking through that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's look at number 13 then, and just walk through what's going on here.
I kind of think with 13 I meant to put, I answered imperative. I think I meant to put imperfect.
Okay.
But I just was reading quickly and didn't, but I did miss it.
Yeah, and so this one here, just to look at what we're seeing, you've got 4 letters. Again, that means that we've got something added to the root because we don't really have 4-letter roots in Hebrew. So what's added? Is the kaf added? Well, as we'll learn, there are situations where you add a kaf suffix to a verb, just like you can add a kaf suffix to a noun or a preposition. We'll learn how to add them to verbs as well. So that's a possibility. It's a possibility that the kaf is added. But if we were to take it off, we'd be ending with this, like there's this holum here that really seems more like an R2 vowel than an R3 vowel. So that's a little unusual. More likely, we've added a nun at the beginning. And we recognize the nun hiric prefix as an imperfect first-person common plural prefix. If we take that off, we get shen, lamed, chaf, and shalach, that, and this holum, like, again, we sometimes call this a theme vowel. Theme vowel just means it's the vowel that is most impacted by the conjugation or by the pattern, and that tends to be the second root letter vowel, so I'll call it either a theme vowel or an R2 vowel, whatever. But this holum, with the nun hiric prefix, that is a perfectly compliant, imperfect 1CP form. Again, the difference here being, if you see a 4-letter verb and the first letter is either yod, tav, aleph, or nun, like just start thinking, like at this point when I see a 4-letter Hebrew verb and I see yod, tav, aleph, or nun as the first letter, I'm automatically thinking imperfect. Now, it took me a while to get that reflex built in, of course, but, and it's not necessarily always that that's what you have, because you've got some one nuns, you've got some one yods, some verbs that begin with tav or aleph that could have a suffix. So it's not a guarantee, but I would say the majority of the time when you run across a 4-letter Hebrew verb and the first letter is one of those imperfect prefix letters, you're probably in the imperfect. If this were the imperative, we'll just talk about that, even though this is probably just a misclick. If this were the imperative, then what we would do, or the way, I guess I should say, the way to make this imperative would be to take the, let's go up here, take the second person form actually. So we have to decide which form of the imperative we want to make. Do we want to make masculine, feminine, plural, singular? Let's just do masculine, plural. Well, then we would need to convert this first into the imperfect 2MP form, which instead of nishloch would be, oh boy, yish yishlachu. All right, and so this would be the imperfect form. If I want the imperative, then I'm just going to delete that prefix, and then I end up with this shabah pattern here that I need to fix. So I just replace that first shabah with a hierarch, and that would give me the imperative to MP form. So that's going to be the difference there. The imperative will lack the prefix. All right, any other, we can look at some jussives if you want. We can look at really anything, but I want to give some time to just, I can pull up Ruth or Genesis and we can just walk through the text looking at verbs and how to parse them out. But I want to make sure that we have some time to actually think through parsing, because at this point, as far as the cal is concerned, we've learned all of the conjugations, except maybe for the cal passive participle. But we've learned everything. So as long as it's a cal verb, we should be able to figure it out. But before I just walk through, Ruth or something, any other questions or anything else you want to bring up?
I don't think so. I was looking back through the quiz, and I think the stuff on the translations I missed was just merely I didn't get it in the right order.
Let's take a look at that.
I'm not a huge fan of Jussive because it confuses me still.
Yeah, I hear you. Few people are a huge fan of the Jussive. Let me.
It's not coming to my birthday. It's not getting an invitation.
I hear you. All right, let's see here. Okay. So if you're looking at your exam or your Unit 9 quiz, the first one, there was a point for the scrolls. So instead of in scrolls, it was in the scrolls.
So you said I missed it because of the definite object.
The definite article on scrolls.
I'm still not seeing where that definite article is at. What am I missing?
Yeah. So the very last word here, basifrim. Do you see that word basifrim? Yes. When you put a preposition in front of a definite noun, when you attach it to the beginning of a definite noun, the only thing that kind of disappears is the hey, because hey doesn't stand up to prefixes and suffixes very well. Those tend to cover up the hey, but the patak and the dagesh will remain there. So I'm going to type out what it would look like if... so this form here is what it would look like without the definite article. So if your translation were correct, you would see bisifrim instead of bas-sifrim. So this is in the scrolls. This is in scrolls. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I had missed that, so I'm glad we covered that.
Yeah. All right, and then the next one here, let me just copy that one as well. Break it down.
This one, I remember wrestling with this one. I could not remember what I and me was.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and that's probably the only place where you went off was, therefore is alkane. So it's kind of close. You've got ain lanu. So when you have an aleph with a lamed and then a kaf with a noon, I mean, it's sort of similar. So I could see how you might associate. But alkane is the word for therefore. So this would be when we have ain. My mnemonic for ain is there ain't no or there ain't none. Like there is not is what ain means. There are not or there is not. So I just think of there ain't. So ain, there is not lanu for us or to us. There is not to us shalom. There is not to us peace because wicked or guilty our king. Wicked is our king. So there is not peace for us or to us because our king is wicked or guilty. But then you have to do the extra step of recognizing that this particle of existence, ain, plus the lamed preposition, this is a way of saying, this is a way of indicating possession. So this should be translated as we do not have peace or we have no peace rather than there is no peace to us. English, we don't say there is no peace to us. Or there, you could get away with saying there is no peace for us in some, I mean, someone could say that in English, but the indication here in Hebrew is possession. So we would say we have no peace or we do not have peace because our king is wicked. So the ain lanu, that would be 1 point. And then missing the predicative relationship here. Because our wicked king, it should be because our king is wicked. This is not an attributive relationship, which is how you've translated it. This is a predicative relationship. You might say, well, in the predicative, isn't that where you have a mismatch in the definiteness? So the adjective would be indefinite and the noun would be definite. And I would say, yes, absolutely right. Even though this doesn't look definite because you don't see a definite article here, it is definite because there are 3 ways that a noun can be definite. Well, there's more, but the 3 primary ways that a noun is definite in Hebrew is, first of all, it has the definite article, or it is a construct within a construct chain where the absolute is definite. The second one would be here, it has a possessive suffix. If a noun has a possessive suffix, that is definite by default because you're referring to a specific king rather than just a king in general. And then the third would be if it's a proper name, or a proper noun, so like a personal name or the name of a city or something like that. So this is definite. This lacks the article. That indicates the predicative relationship. So if you were to say because our king is wicked, then you would get full credit for that second half. So that's the 2 points there. All right. Now I'm sorry.
Definitely because of the ending, but what is it about the ending that makes it definite?
Yeah, sorry. I'm working off of the quiz, which is on my top screen, and you can only see my bottom screen. So sorry, that's confusing. Let me go through that again here on the one that you can actually see.
You're good. I have my quiz pulled up.
Okay. So yeah, basically as we go through here, we've got the Ain Lanu, and just the mistranslation of that was 1 point, and then we get to Rasha Malkanu. Now Malkanu here, you got the fact that this is our, you said our wicked king, but when you translate it as our wicked king, that is an attributive translation rather than a predicative translation. And the way that you would know that this should be translated predicatively is because the adjective and the noun disagree in definiteness. The adjective lacks the article, and while the noun doesn't have an article, it does have this possessive suffix anu. And this possessive suffix anu is what makes it definite. And so since the noun is definite and the adjective is indefinite, that's when we get that predicative relationship where it would be because our king is wicked. All right, let's see. And then the last one here. This one's pretty easy to explain. It's just a minor difference. Let me go here. So this one, you translate as there is the son of a wicked priest. And that's really close. It's too literal, but it's really close to the correct too literal. The only thing you're missing in your very literal translation is this lamed preposition. You said there is the son of a wicked priest. But what this is there is two. This lamed preposition, there is two. And again, particle of existence plus lamed, that indicates possession. So there is to the priest or for the priest, a son, a wicked one. And this would be attributive because the adjective lacks the article and the noun is indefinite. There's no definiteness here at all. And so the too literal translation would be there is to the priest a wicked son. The proper way to translate that is the priest has a wicked son, because again, yesh plus lamed indicates possession. So that's where, I'm not going to take away more points, but I realize now that actually there could be 1 point on the lamed and 1 point on Rasha is modifying the wrong noun. You've got Rasha modifying Kohen and Rasha, and it could modify either one, but you're not going to have an intervening noun between an adjective and the noun that it modifies. So that's probably more of a second year sort of a thing, so maybe that's why I didn't count off for that. But the primary translation issue here was this lamed indicating possession.
Yeah, but I wrestled with them for a long time trying to figure out how to put it together.
Yeah, these are they're unintuitive form. Like, they're just so different than English. Like, even if you translate it literally well, it doesn't sound right in English, so it causes you to second guess yourself. All right. Okay, so that's it for the quiz. Anything else you want to look at?
No, I feel better. I always get the attributive and predicate stuff wrong, so having the definiteness, I think, has been the issue.
Yeah, and that takes time. I mean, that just takes a lot of practice.
I feel good with it.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and walk through Ruth a little bit here because I'd like to get a little bit more. Oh, you know what? We were also going to take a look at, before I go to Ruth, let me pull Futato up because I want to take a look at this week's exercises a little bit here.
I had a question on the lexicon, too.
Yeah, what's that?
I went through and I was walking through the test stuff, and the root that I have that I think is the right one didn't have any mention of the number of times it was used, or assumed or guessed that it was used, I guess.
Did you email me about this?
Yes.
Okay, I was going to say that if not, then someone else had this issue too. And you sent me a picture of the lexicon, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that looked correct. Let me pull up my version of that and see what I can find. What's the verb that it tells you to look up?
1 minute, I got to pull it up.
Because, and you're saying there's no way it occurs only one time. There's no way the verb occurs only one time. But my guess is what this means is every time it appears, except for once, it's a verb rather than a noun. That would be how I would read this. So with what I'm looking at, 1 is the correct answer because it's not because it says one time. It doesn't say that, but what it says is it cites Exodus 4:26, and then it has this symbol, which means that it's listed all of the occurrences of that word. So 1 would be the correct answer. I don't have an answer key. I think they just expect me to be able to answer these. But yeah, I would take 1 as the correct answer here. Let's try this out. Let's do a search. And let's do a Bible search for, bring it down here. Look at that. Okay, so even in a Bible, all Bibles, or I should say, I'm searching my top Bibles for the word circumcision. In the Old Testament, Exodus 4:26 is the only hit. So that is surprising to me too. That's really weird, but that's the case apparently. So, anyways, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was one of those rare instances where I had it right. I
Yeah.
just didn't feel like it was right.
Right. Well, I wouldn't. I mean, if that's a rare instance for you, that's good because that's going to happen a lot in Hebrew. I feel like you feel, you've got the right answer, but it doesn't feel right. That's pretty normal. All right. Well, let's take a look quickly at the chapters or the lessons for this week and just walk through them here. Again, I tried to give sort of a simplified explanation of what this Vav-Relative does. There's two things you need to know about it. You need to know how to recognize it when you see it. You need to know, hey, I'm looking at a Vav-Relative. And then you need to know what effect that Vav-Relative is going to have on your translation. And so for the first part, recognizing a Vav-Relative, it's pretty easy when a Vav-Relative is attached to an imperfect because it's a very distinctive form. I call it sort of like a verbal definite article. Not that it doesn't do the same thing a definite article does. It just looks a lot like the pattern you're used to seeing for the definite article, which is a patak vowel and a dagesh in the next letter. So instead of a hey, you just use a vav. Now here when you get into the aleph, this aleph here is going to prefer the kametz segel vowel pattern. So, well, actually, no, that's not the reason why here. It's because the aleph can't take a dagesh. And so the lack of a dagesh forces the patak to lengthen to a kametz. But that pattern generally is what you're looking for. So for the imperfect, when the Vav-Relative is on the imperfect, it's pretty easy to find. It's pretty easy to recognize. Since he mentions it, I'll just say as well, we call this the imperfect form because the form that you're looking at, 9 times out of 10 is going to be imperfect. But remember, except for third hey verbs, hollow verbs, and I think that's all we've learned so far. Oh, and geminates. Except for third hey verbs, hollow verbs, and geminates, the jussive is going to look identical to the imperfect. What this actually is, what we're actually attaching the Vav-Relative to is not the imperfect, but the jussive. And that has a little bit to do with why it does some of the weird stuff it does meaning-wise. It's not actually an imperfect form here. It's a jussive form, which is why the shortening that occurs with the jussive is also going to occur when you have a Vav-Relative. Because that Vav-Relative is actually attached to the jussive form, the shortenings that you see in the jussive compared to the imperfect, you'll also see in the Vav-Relative with the imperfect compared to the regular imperfect. So that is to say a third hey verb like bana. In the imperfect, bana would be yivneh. Let me write that out. Get my Word document back. Good enough. All right, so we've got our third hey verb, bana. This is the Cal Perfect 3MS. When we want to put that into the imperfect, we add the yod here prefix. We've got R1 that we're now going to use to close that prefix syllable. So we've got yiv. And then we're going to have R2 opening the next syllable. And in the perfect, we use a kametz hey, but in the imperfect, we use a segel hey, yivneh. But remember, when we go to the jussive, third hey verbs are going to lose their third hey, and so you get something like yivna without a hey. Well, that segel doesn't want to be out there naked, exposed without a hey protecting it. And so this segel instead is going to jump back here, and you're just going to close this syllable with the noon, and so you get yivin. So here we've got the perfect, here we've got the imperfect, and here we've got the jussive. So when we add a Vav-Relative to bana, we can add a Vav-Relative. Oops. Oh boy. We can add a Vav-Relative to the perfect form, vivana, or we can add a Vav-Relative to the what we usually call imperfect, but again, this isn't the imperfect, this is the jussive form. So the Vav-Relative plus the perfect, vevana, versus the Vav-Relative plus the imperfect jussive, vayivan. The difference here, and again, this is the simplest way to conceive of it at this point. You will learn that it's a little bit more complicated than this in second year, but the easiest way to understand what's happening here is to just say that this Vav-Relative inverts the time of the verb. So whereas bana would usually be translated as he built, instead of past, we're going to translate it future. Vevana is going to be he will build. Yivin or yivneh would usually be translated as he will build. So vayivin is going to be translated, we're going to go from future back to past. He built, okay? And so you could easily ask yourself, wait a minute, if this means he will build, if this means he will build, and this means he built, and this means he built, and this means he will build, why are we using the Vav-Relative at all? Like, just use the correct conjugation, right? And that's a great question because it does strike the elementary student as rather silly to be doing all of this. but there is there's a few reasons why this happens, and they're bigger than a sentence. So the times when you're going to use the times when you're going to use vevana versus yivneh, where they both would mean he will build, you're going to use this at different times than you would use yivneh. You're going to use vayiven at different times than you would use bana. And you'll learn more about what those times are in second year. But for example, vevana, the vav-relative plus the perfect, this often occurs in prophecy or poetry. All right, this does not occur in like if you're reading a narrative and there's dialogue in the narrative, so one character is speaking to another character and they talk about something that will happen, they're probably going to use the imperfect there. But in prophecy or in poetry, where it's not dialogue, it's the author actually projecting into the future or something like that, that's where this vav-relative is more appropriate. When you have, again, let's say you have a narrative. This would be a great time to jump over here to Ruth. So let's say you have a narrative and you want to establish the storyline. So the sequence of the storyline is A happened, then B happened, then C happened, on and on and on and on. What you usually do is you usually start with either a vav-relative plus the jussive / imperfect, or you start with, let's say, a perfect. Those are going to set the scene as in the past. And then every time you take a step forward in the narrative, you're going to use this vav-relative plus the jussive imperfect. So Ruth 1:1, we have vayihi. Well, this is the jussive form of haya, hey yod hey. It's the jussive form because it's got the yod prefix. It's dropped the hey, even though there's no suffix. That's how we know it's jussive. But it's also got the vav patak daga. Oh, no dagesh. Okay. Well, this is another. I hope Futato mentions this. The Skinnem Levy rule.
While you're looking at it, I just want to point out it's the jussive that's causing problems, and yet more reasons why I don't like it.
Exactly. Yeah, he doesn't. Oh man, I don't think he points it out here. So in Hebrew, when you have a class of letters, and I'll define that class, in a minute, but when you have a class of letters with a shavah under them, where you would normally expect a dagesh will often be lacking. And one way that we define that class of letters is by the mnemonic Skinnem Levy. And Skinnem Levy, if you think it through as you're saying it, that's S sound, K sound, N sound, M sound, L sound, V sound, Y sound. Skinnem Levy. Letters that make those sounds, yod happens to be the Y sound, Skinnem Levy. Letters that make those sounds that have a shavah tend to lack a dagesh when you expect one. All right, so that's all you need to know. When you have those letters, they won't always have the dagesh that you expect, especially if there's a shavah under them. So here we have the jussive of haya with the vav patak attached to the front. This is a vav-relative on the verb haya. So haya means it happened or it became. The imperfect would be it will happen. And then to put the vav-relative on there inverts that back to past tense. It happened. So it happened in the day, be may. So this is yom. I know it doesn't look like yom, but when you have yom and you have it plural, you get yamim. And then when you make it construct, you get yameh with a shavah here. So this becomes be may, the days of shafot. Now shafot here, this is not shofet. This is an infinitive construct. In the days of to judge or judging of ha-shoftim. In the days of the judging of the judges, or in the days when the judges judged. Here we've got vayehi again. It happened, or there was, ra'av ba'aretz. Ra'av is the word for a famine, and ba'aretz is going to be in the land. And then we've got a vav-relative, so this is the next step in the story. The first step was setting the scene in the days of the judges. There came a famine. Next, and Yelid, vayelid, and begat, Yalad. Oh, Yelek, not Yeled, Yelech. So this is halach. So this would be halach is he went or he walked. Yelech is going to be he will walk. But again, the vav-relative pushes that back to past tense. So there walked or he walked a man. A man walked from, or a man went from Beit Lechem, literally from a house of bread. Excuse me. Now think about that here. In the days of the judging of the judges, there was a famine in the land, and a man went from a house of bread. He's going away from a house of bread somewhere else. Now this is literally house of bread, but it's Beit Lechem, from Bethlehem. So this is the town Bethlehem, but it's important to the story that you realize he's walking away from a town called House of Bread because there's a famine. And then Yehuda, this is Judah, Lagur, this is the purpose lamed. So this is indicating the reason why he vayelek. Why did he go from Bethlehem? He went to, or in order to, gur. Gur is a hollow verb. It means to wander or to travel, sojourn, to travel as a foreigner, that sort of a thing. He went to sojourn. Bis day. This is the bait preposition on sadeh or sadeh, but this is going to be the masculine plural construct. So bis day is going to be in fields of Moab, which is Moab. This is a name of a place, so it is definite. That means that sadeh is definite here, or sadeh. So that would be in the fields of Moab. He and ishto. Ishto is the feminine form of ish with the holam vav suffix. I know you're saying, but wait, there's a tav here. Remember that isha, the hey doesn't like to have suffixes. So just like we saw in the Cal Perfect 3FS, the hey hardens into a tav and then takes the suffixes. That's what happens here. So isha becomes isht, and then we put holam vav on there for ishto. He and his wife, ushene, and two of banav. This is the word for ben, or I should say bane, but here we've got banav, his sons. So he went, okay, and then we've got here Vishem, okay? So you'll notice that Vishem here, this is not a Vav-Relative because Shem is a noun. Shem is attached to a noun, not a verb. And so Vishem is not a Vav-Relative. That means we're not at the next step in the narrative yet. When we've got a sentence or a clause beginning with a Vav, but not a Vav-Relative in narrative, that often indicates that we're looking at sort of like, sometimes we call it offline information, or sometimes we call it background information. But this is almost, it's kind of like in Genesis 1-2, it's sort of like a parenthesis. So instead of like and a name of his wife, we might say something like now. The name, or sorry, of the man. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the name of the two of his sons, Machlon and Kilion. This is an interesting phrase. I'm trying to figure out how to relate it to what comes before. It almost seems like it's appositional. Ephratim, this is saying that these people, or at the very least the sons, but probably all of them, because of the same family, they were Ephrathites. So Ephrathites that's a location, basically where someone is from Bethlehem of Judah. And then we get our Vav-Relative here, Vav Patak Dagesh. And so Vayavo'u. So this is an interesting one, but we can still figure it out because we know everything we need to know here. If I could quit clicking on stuff. We've got a Vav Patak Dagesh, so this is a Vav-Relative. If we take that off, what are we left with? We're left with, and let me just draw it up in Word here. All right, so we've got Va, Vai, Ya, Vo, U. If we take off the Vav Patak Dagesh, we're left with Yod, Kametz, Beit, Holam, Aleph, Shurik. All right. Now this almost looks like the verb bo, which means he went, or he went forth, or he entered, he came in, he went in, that sort of a thing. But you'll notice it's lacking its middle vav here. The holam vav doesn't have the vav letter, it's just a holam. But in the imperfect, hollow verbs retain their vav. So why have we lost it here? Well, we've lost it because this isn't an imperfect form. This is a jussive form. This is Vav Patak Dagesh plus the jussive. All right, so that's why we have Ya-vo-u instead of Ya-vo-u, like that, okay? But this is the imperfect. This is the jussive form of bo. Bo means he went or he entered, something like that, went into. In the jussive, it would mean something like may he enter or may he go. But when we add the Vav-Relative, it inverts this back to past tense. And so it says, and he went in, or he entered, Sadeh Moav, the fields of Moab. But what I want you to see here is, in verse 1, we start with the Vav-Relative. In the day of the, in the day of the judging of the judges, there came a great famine. That's step 1. Step 2. After which, next step, a man went from Bethlehem of Judah to sojourn in the fields of Moab, he and his wife and the two of his sons. Now there's no Vav-Relative here, so this is sort of like side information. Now his name, and the name of him was Elimelech, and the name, this is construct, that's why I'm saying the name, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the name of the two of his sons, Machlon and Kilion, Ephrathites, from Bethlehem of Judah. Then we get the Vav-Relative again. So now next step. So the man went, we get some background information about their names, and he entered into the fields of Moab, and Vayehu. So this is, again, this is the form of Hayah. This is the jussive form of Hayah, but here it's plural. And they were there. So this it's kind of weird to translate into English, but this Hayah verb, this is basically the idea of they existed there, something like that. Okay. And then verse 3, again, we get another Vav, Patak, Dagesh. So what you'll see as you look at narrative is this Vav-Relative, especially the one that attaches to the jussive/imperfect, this is incredibly common in narrative. It's how Hebrew tells a story. You might think, well, why doesn't it just use the perfect? Well, with the perfect, you don't get the same, we wouldn't know that this, verse 2, was all background information. At least we wouldn't have the same signal that this is background information if we didn't have this function of the Vav-Relative that occurs in narrative, where the steps of the narrative are signaled by the Vav-Relative on the imperfect, or the jussive, and asides are given when a Vav appears on like a noun or something like that. So that's one reason why we have a Vav-Relative and a perfect when you kind of end up translating them the same way. All right, so verse 3 here, Vav, Patak, Dagesh. If we take that off, we get Yamat. Now, Yamat, this is from Mut. Okay, and so here what we've got is the jussive form of Mut. Mut would be, in the perfect, it would be he died. Yamat in the jussive would be may he die. And then here when we add the Vav-Relative, we get and he died. So, and Elimelech died, husband of Naomi. And, so let's figure out this. We'll parse this out. We've got Vav, Patak, Dagesh. We've got a Tav Hirik prefix, it looks like. Now, we've also got a Dagesh in R2, which tells me this is a form that we haven't learned yet. That Dagesh in R2 with a Kametz under it, in the Shin, that tells me this is Nifal, which we've not had yet. Okay, but our root is going to be Shin, Aleph, Resh. Now that is not a form, or that is not a word, Sha'ar. This is not a word that we've learned yet. So we'll look it up in this case. I think Sha'ar, for some reason I'm connecting Sha'ar with pray, but I don't know if that fits this context. So yeah, Sha'ar means to leave behind, or remain. So to leave behind or to remain. In the Nifal is often used to indicate passive voice. And so in the Nifal, instead of and she and, or sorry, wife of Naomi, and she and the two of her sons didn't leave behind, but were left behind, that passive idea. So, and Elimelech, Elimelech, husband of Naomi, died, and she and the two of her sons were left behind. All right, we'll stop here, but I just want to note that we've got Vav, Patak, Dagesh. This is the next step in the narrative. So you can see here, verse 5, verse 6, Vav, Patak, Dagesh. Verse 7, Vav, Patak, Dagesh. Verse 8, Vav, Patak, Dagesh. This Vav-Relative, so-called, that we have here, this is what carries the narrative forward. This is what gives us the next step in the story. All right, and so when you see this, I want you to know this is, first of all, it's very common. It's very common in narrative, and it's also guiding you through the story so that you know how the information of the clause relates to the bigger picture of the story. All right, so enough said on that. That's probably good enough to incorporate both reading through the Hebrew text and taking a look at some of the material that we are studying this week. That's 26, but let's look real quick at 27. I want to look real quick at what he says about Vav-Relative on the perfect. Oh, okay. Okay, conditional, that's good to know. All right, let's look at 27 real quick, see if there's anything here that you need to pay special attention to. These chapters tend to kind of take what you've already learned and sort of synthesize them in a new way. So here we're just looking at how to create a temporal clause, it looks like. Bait or kof plus an infinitive construct is going to give you contemporary time. So when or while or as would be the translation. When he sent the prophet, as he sent the prophet, while he sent the prophet. After is, you're not going to use the bait or the kof. Here you've got achrei, so it's literally after. Yeah, again, the infinitive does not indicate time in and of itself. It doesn't indicate whether something is future, past, or anything like that. So you're going to have to base the time of the infinitive off of the context of the clause, broadly speaking. All right, so the vayehi, that's going to set the time in the past, and vehaya, that's going to set the time in the future. And you will see vayehi and vehaya with temporal clauses relatively frequently. All right. Kind of looks like...
In regards with the vayehi and vayeha stuff, I'm having a lot of trouble memorizing all of those. Is there a trick to that can be helpful, or is it just strictly make note cards and beat it to death.
Yeah, I mean, the quickest way might be to just put vehaya on a card and then on the back say future time, and then put vayahi on a card and then on the back say past time. That may be the quickest way to get it down, but you can also sort of think it through. I mean, vehaya, haya is the perfect form with the vav-relative attached. And so if you know perfect is usually past time and that the vav-relative inverts that, that will get you future. Over here, yahi, this is the jussive, which is related to the imperfect form of haya. Imperfect usually indicates future, but the vav-relative is going to invert that to past. So I would say that when it comes down to it, if you're stumbling over it, thinking it through in the conjugation may be helpful. But if you have to think it through like that every time you come up to these words in translation, it's really going to slow down your reading. And so in that sense, it may be helpful just to memorize vehaya and vayahi. It might be helpful to just memorize those as vocabulary words, and instead of on the back saying future time, you could say something like you'd have to translate it with a phrase, but you could say for vayahi, you could say it happened, and for vehaya, you could say it will happen. I mean, that would be kind of a quick gloss. So it happened, which is past tense, and it will happen, which is future tense. That might be a way to do it. If you learn these as individual words, they're not just words, they're like, phrases kind of. But if you learn them that way, that will certainly be quicker for your translation, how long it takes you to translate.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Okay, a couple things here that are important that he just kind of mentions. He kind of glosses over pretty quickly. Note how he translates this. So if you were to translate this sentence literally, it would be, and it happened as he sent, or when he sent the prophet, and the prophet went to the city. But that doesn't make sense in English, which is why he doesn't translate it that way. He translates when he sees that this is vayahi plus an infinitive construct with a temporal preposition, he just makes the decision, okay, this is a temporal clause in Hebrew, so I'm going to use a temporal clause in English. And in English, we build our temporal clauses differently. So he doesn't say, and it happened when he sent the prophet, and it happened when he sent the prophet. He kind of just leaves this off because temporal clauses are dependent clauses, and this verb should not be in English if that's the case. So he just kind of ignores vayahi. I mean, he lets vayahi set the timing of this. So it is when he sent the prophet, but he doesn't say, and it happened when he sent the prophet. He just says, when he sent the prophet went to the city. That's an important thing to pick up on, because if you translate these two clauses as independent clauses in English, they're going to be redundant. They're not going to make a lot of sense. This is getting close to second year level stuff because you're having to incorporate syntax and like clausal function. But it's important to note here that Hebrew doesn't have dependent and independent clauses the same way English does. And if you try to translate two Hebrew independent clauses into two English independent clauses, when one of them is temporal, English doesn't use temporal clauses independently. And so pay attention, like translate through each of these sort of like on your own, and then look at his translation and notice what he's doing differently. So, and basically I'm telling you what he's doing differently is he's basically keeping this vayahi vehaya word out of his translation. He's just eliminating it. And it happened when he sent, and I'm saying when he sent because it's literally as him to send the prophet. Well, that doesn't make sense in English. This is saying when he sent the prophet. That's how we say this in English. So that's why I'm translating it that way. But I'm not saying, and it happened when he sent the prophet. I'm leaving this off. So when he sent the prophet, and I'm leaving the and off in my translation as well, the prophet went to the city. So again, I'm going to leave this off. I'm going to note that it's past tense. That's the clue I'm going to get from it. But then I'm going to leave it off. Achrei, after him to send the prophet. What does that mean? That means after he sent the prophet. Leave off the and. Yishlach. I get it. Okay, I'm like, it doesn't, but he already sent the prophet. So after he sent the prophet, he sent the priest. Okay, so he's sending someone different. It was confusing me for a second. But again, I'm just leaving this off. Let's look at the last one. Leave this off, but note that it indicates future time. So here, when he sends the prophet will go. Again, the vav-relative on the perfect is going to indicate future time. When he sends the prophet will go to the city. Not the prophet went to the city. The prophet will go to the city. All right, so pay special attention to this section in particular, these three sentences, because this is something that students tend to have trouble with. And really, just a shortcut, all he's really doing here is he's leaving out these vayahi, vehaya verbs. He's translating the infinitives as finite verbs. When he sends, after he sent, when he sent. and then he's leaving off the and of the second Vav-Relative. And that, if you do those things, that should give you a good English translation. So let's look at it on this one here. I'm noting that this is setting the scene in the past. This is past time. It happened, but I don't have a temporal clause here. So I have to be a little bit careful, but let me just translate through. It happened that he sent the prophet, and the prophet went to the city. So again, I've left off nothing. I fully translated it, and it works okay in English because I'm not translating this as a temporal clause. Now, Futato says you can, and maybe even you should, but here I've translated it as it happened that he sent the prophet. Now, it happened that he sent the prophet is kind of superfluous in English. We would just say he sent the prophet. But what Futato's pointing out here is that these two Vav-relatives are actually linked in a special way. They're not completely independent of one another. They're connected. And so the way that they're connected is this Vav-relative clause is setting the timing of this clause. And that's why he translates it as a relative clause. It's not just one thing happened and then unrelatedly another thing happened. These two are related in some way. And the specific way they're related is the action of sending the prophet. So when he sent the prophet went to the city. After, again, it happened after he sent the prophet. So after he sent the prophet, he sent the priest. This is again kind of this is really similar to what we did up here. I'm actually not sure what the preposition or particle. I think this is the same. How is this a different sentence? Vayehi achrei shalach. Oh, the difference is this is actually a perfect verb instead of an infinitive construct. Okay. The segmentation here is a little confusing. Okay, this whole section is on the preposition plus infinitive construct. Now this new section is on a preposition or particle plus the perfect or the imperfect. Okay. But you see they end up getting translated the same way. All right, time words, this is important to pay attention to as well. It happened in the day, that one, so you would just translate it as in that day he sent the prophet. It will happen in the day, that one, so you would just say in that day he will send the prophet. It happened in the morning he went to the city. You would just say in the morning he went to the city. It will happen in the morning he will go to the city. In the morning he will go to the... So you can see here all four of these as well. You pay attention to this v'haya vayehi word. You pay attention to it. You note what it's saying about the timing, but then you don't include it in your translation, and it cleans it up a lot. We just go with on that day he sent the prophet. Here you go. On that day he will send the prophet. In the morning he will go to the city. Here in the morning. In the morning he went to the city. Here in the morning he will go to the city. Okay, so we're just kind of leaving this verb out of our translation. All right, interrogative clauses. We've got me and ma. This is who and what. And the way I just remember this is who, me. Who, me means who, me. And then ma, I just think of wa. So ma and wa. Ma is what. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but you do need to know that me is for who and ma is for what. All right. And then this little guy here, this guy's fun. Basically, this is the form you're usually going to see. It's a hey with a hatef patach under it. If this is attached to a verb, especially at the beginning of a sentence, then take the sentence that you would normally have and just turn it into a question. So this sentence without the interrogative particle would mean he went to the city. With the interrogative particle, you could call it the Hebrew question mark. Just translate he went to the city and put a question mark at the end. He went to the city? Now, how would we really ask that in English? More formally, we would say, did he go to the city? Here we have he will go to the city. You would say that will he go to the city? All right. Then we've got, so PL is next week. That'll be fun. You get a new stem, new pattern, however he calls it. Okay, well, that's about it as far as I can think of what to cover. Any other questions or anything, Ben?
Not right now. I'm sure I'll have some.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a heavy week. There's a lot to go through this week, but not a ton of it is new. It might be new conceptually, like putting things together in a way that you haven't before, but it's not like there's a lot of new forms that you have to learn or anything like that. It's more just kind of expanding the information you already have. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier. Probably not, but all right. Well, if you do have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you, brother.